Hello my dears, I'm going to introduce myself before I explain why we're here. Hi there, hello, my name is Sydney, I'm an autistic, queer, trans, disabled, non-binary, those are all the things, actor, educator, composer, and advocate. I'm doing a thesis on reforming theater education that is culminating in the world's first all-neurodivergent cast and crew production of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. You can learn more about that in the links in my description. And I'm a white person in their early 20s with shoulder-length light brown curly hair that is currently in pigtails, and I am wearing a what am I wearing? I'm wearing a tan crew neck t-shirt. Tan crew neck t-shirt with a dark green button up on top, and I am sitting in front of a bookshelf. For a bit of background, I've been in the field of theater for most of my life, but in the weirdest possible ways because I don't follow the traditional paths or pathways of anything in life, and I'm pretty content with that at this point. But it has made my theater education wildly spotty, and what I mean by that is that I was all in doing theater stuff from grades 5 through 9. Then I left theater planning to be a teacher for all of high school, and then first year of college hopped back into theater. And basically I went straight into a conservatory program in Italy where everybody there had been doing high-level performing arts in high school and then was in a BFA arts program. Quite the culture shock. Not saying that I'm not capable of working and learning at that level, because I very much am, but it did mean that they all threw around a lot of names of famous theater practitioners that everybody knew very well and could throw around, and I had never heard of them. And that made the imposter syndrome very strong. I did know enough to know that they're all probably old white men who I probably disagree with on a lot of points and want to approach theater education completely differently if I were to run my own classroom. But if I'm gonna complain about a pedagogic system, I want to know specifically why I hate it rather than just hating it on principle, you know? And I'm very much of the belief that you need to know all of the rules before you can break them, because then that rule breaking is both careful and conscious and therefore the most effective rule breaking. So my initial plan was to buy the books of each one of these people and read everything that they all had to say for my thesis to figure out what all the rules were before I could break them. But then I realized that first of all, if I'm gonna hate them, what is the point of spending that money and time? Also, I have way too many books for my thesis. I have like 75, and if I'm gonna get anywhere productively and actually finish this in time to graduate, I need to cut some corners. I also did not at all intend to make this a video, but when I finished researching this, I realized that it kind of needed to be one. And that means that my sources are written down absolutely nowhere. Most of them are branched off of Wikipedia pages and random pages of notes I found around my room. And this is going to be a very surface level overview of the 26 practitioners on my list. I hate making surface level listy videos, but in learning all this stuff, I started to construct a sort of narrative of what theater education should look like, where everything came from, how bastardized some of these methods have become when taught in classrooms, and how if I had this video before I went to Italy, I would have been so much less anxious and I would have actually learned stuff because I would have understood the why. And I also now know that there's not nearly enough discussion about how unregulated actor training is and how problematic that truly is for people. Though we're gonna dig into that a little bit more in a few weeks. I'm making a deep dive into method acting. This is just part one of that, sort of. So anyway, I usually give you all of my full source list in the description. That is tradition for me because I want to be transparent about what I research and where I've learned things from. I'm not going to do that here because this video is an educator's view of the first 3 articles that came up on Google about each of these individual people, so that you don't have to spend 3 full days researching this and can have the same information that I do. I will split it up into chapters based on who I talk about though, so you can look more deeply into them if you like their methods. Great. I can't promise this is going to be the most riveting or well-flowing video, but I do promise that it will give you the tools to fight your next acting teacher and or feel way smarter in that classroom. Maybe. And we're gonna go in vague timeline order so that you can see how everything builds on top of itself. Also, this is very US and Europe centric. That's how theater is taught in the West. I'm sorry about it, but it's reality. So, first dead white dude, we have André Antoine. He lived in France. He was active from like 1880 to 1943. Also, when I say active, I mean like when he started like doing theater stuff, you know, because the beginning of his life was baby. This is gonna be a long one. Anyway, he was a director and educator, and he wanted theater to be more realist and naturalist because he thought that theater was too disconnected from reality, and he wanted to fix that. He never reused his sets. He always used plays that were thin on plot, dense in social and psychological implication. Believed that each play had a very specific theme that he tried to drive everything in the show towards. He also created the idea of the fourth wall, often staging his plays in a closed room and literally deciding which wall to remove to give the audience the perspective that he wanted them to have of the show. He also created the idea of mise en scène, which is a placement of actors in a scene and using that as a way to tell the story on top of the text itself. That's it. That's all I got on this guy. Next we have Rudolf Le Bon. I'm going to be honest, this is the only one that I don't completely understand. Like, I get that he categorized movement in lots of different ways and analyzed that movement through that lens, but I'm not entirely sure how he set up his classroom or taught it, if that makes sense. I intend to research this one a little bit more down the line, but anyway, Laban started teaching in Hungary in the 1880s. He created the Laban-Barton-Yeff movement analysis, also known as LMA, and it's basically a bunch of different categorizations of movement, which I will explain in a hot second. And what I think is really cool about this is that this work is very interdisciplinary. In creating it, he worked with doctors and mathematicians and dancers, and he did his best to make it as holistic and safe as possible, and I think that that's really, really cool. Most people that we're gonna learn about did not do that at all whatsoever. Some people credit Laban's method as the foundation of dance therapy. He had 6, we're gonna call them tenets of movement analysis, I guess, ways of looking at movement. The first is relationship. This is the interaction between people, body parts, objects, etc. Then we have phrasing. This is a personal expression of movement. Then body, the structural and physical characteristics of the body while it's moving, such as patterns of body organization, sequencing of movements between parts of one body, connection of different bodies, etc. We follow that with effort, also known as dynamics. These are the subtle characteristics of movement in relation to inner intention or why somebody is moving the way that they do. He, along with many other practitioners, have this idea that full effort should be very rare and very momentary, both for impact on audience and also for energy economization for the dancer or actor so that they don't burn out as quickly. A fascinating concept that's super common in the original wishes of the original teachers and yet conveniently forgotten to be explained in educational settings. Wild! He divided these dynamics into space, weight, time, and flow with various descriptions of the movement like indirect or direct, strong or light, sudden or sustained, bound or free, fighting or indulging, and then he had combinations of these which are float, punch, glide, slash, dab, ring, flick, press, awake, dreamlike, distant, near slash rhythm, stabile, labile, mobile. This is the particular piece I want to learn more about because I think that if I understood it in more depth, it would really influence my different shades of movement and give me more intention in what I do. But right now they're just words. Then we have shape. That's the way a body changes shape during movement. He divided this into forms, modes of shape change, shape qualities, and shape flow support. I can't express how many graphs and tables this man had. Yeah, so forms are static shapes that he described as wall-like, ball-like, pin-like, etc. Modes of shape change are how the body interacts with and to the wider environment. This includes shape flow, or the relation of the body to itself, how streams of consciousness are expressed through movement. Directional flow, a relationship where the body is directed towards a part of the environment, such as spoke-like, which is a punching movement, or arc-like, which is a painting movement. And then carving, which is how the body three-dimensionally reacts to and interacts with its environment, such as wringing a towel or kneading bread. Shape qualities are how the body changes actively towards a pointed space, such as opening, closing, sinking, rising, retreating, spreading. There are more. He uses so many words, and I don't understand how a human is supposed to keep track of all of these words, but good for him. And shape flow support is how the torso changes in shape in order to support movement in the rest of the body. This is measured as present or absent. Can we make more noise outside, please? I highly, highly want that to happen. While we're waiting for the loud truck to pass, I want to show you my sticker. This is not sponsored. I bought this sticker from Hydroscapes and it goes all the way around and it's a national park and I love it. Anyway, okay. So, continuing on. His last category is space. This is the complex system of spatial orientation that he based directly on math and science. So ironically, it is the most abstract and confusing of all of them. It has a lot of Platonic solids, how the body relates to space in a mathematical sense, geometrical observations of where the movement is done, like direction, place in space, planar movement, etc. That's it. That's what I got for you. That's Laban. Seemed like a cool dude. Definitely want to learn more about him. Dead white guy number 3, we have Edward Gordon Craig. Based on the amount I've heard about him, I was underwhelmed by what came up about him. He grew up basically backstage at the Lyceum Theatre in England. He was an actor, director, and designer from 1890 to 1960 who was well known for being way too particular and wildly difficult to work with. He believed that the director is the only true artist and that the actors are just puppets who don't really matter or have any skill at all whatsoever. And also he created the idea of top lighting because before him it had just been footlights at the bottom of the stage, pointing up at the actors. So he created a completely new way to light stages, but he also sounds like he kind of sucked. So there's that. Max Reinhardt is another name that I hear a lot. He's also really well known in the film world. He was active around the same time as Craig, but in Austria. He got caught up in some Nazi stuff. So that's awkward. But anyway, he was one of the first in German theater to integrate stage design, language, and text and movement and music and choreography all into the same performance. That's it. That's all I got in this guy. Then we have Frederick Alexander and the famous Alexander technique. He was Australian. He developed this technique in the 1890s. This is a technique I also hear of on the daily, and so I found it to be downright disappointing when I researched it because I thought this was this great, grand, revolutionary thing that I was a bad person for not knowing about, only to find that it's pretty much the exact same stuff that I did when I was in physical therapy for chronic migraines. So what I'm actually hearing is that disabled kids are the best at the Alexander technique and all the boring regular people have to be taught it and think that it's new and exciting because their worldview is too narrow, but whatever. It's based on the idea that posture is equivalent to your health, so it teaches particular posture to allow for balanced use of the vocal tract, more natural tone, wider performance, etc. If you're wondering, doctors have thoroughly researched this. It might help with long-term back pain and or neck pain, maybe, but they're not really sure, and it might help your performance, maybe, but they're not really sure. So that was sad. I was sad that it wasn't as exciting as I've always been told it was, but now I know what it is. Yay. After Alexander, we have Jacques Coupeau. He was active from 1910 to 1949. He lived in France. Shocking by his name, I know. He was annoyed that theater was too over the top, too commercial. He wanted to simplify it. So he founded a school to teach acting and stagecraft because he was like, the reform of theater could only come from properly training the actor, which for what it's worth, I very much agree with, and that is why I'm doing this thesis about fixing our training of actors. And he also wanted to break down the barrier between actor and audience. But then after some of the time working at the school he created, he was like, oh man, everything's hopeless and actors can't be reformed, so theater can't be reformed, so we're just gonna create the idea of an Uber marionette, which is a giant puppet to replace the human actor entirely, because the ideal actor is a puppet who reflects the essential mood or soul of a drama, and no human is good enough to be able to do that. That is vaguely hilarious problem solving. It's also wildly impractical, but I wish him luck in his endeavors. Next we have Chekhov. Not the playwright dude, that confused me. It's actually his nephew. He was active from like 1913 to 1954. He created the idea of psychophysical work when educating his actors, grounding their emotions in physical gestures. He did this by taking a character's internal wants, needs, and or impulses and turning them into external gestures such as push, pull, shrink, grow, etc. And having the actors practice them so much that these needs became internalized into a character's personality. He also had this idea of radiating, which was sharing your and your character's internal essence, such as intentions and choices and such, with your scene partners, and he believed that improvisation was the best way to practice, learn, and sharpen skills. Then we have my man, Stanislavski. This is a man that I've always hated and talked bad about, and I'm now realizing that I actually really hate Strasberg, and that every one of my teachers has smushed Stanislavski and Strasberg's teaching together and called it Stanislavski, and that Stanny Boy was pretty alright, and he seemed like a decent human, if not in fact a genuinely great one. I didn't know him personally, so I can't tell you, but he was born in 1863 in Imperial Russia. He started changing the face of theater forever with his method in 1909, and then in 1917 there was the whole revolution thing, and Imperial Russia rapidly became the USSR. He continued changing theater forever until he died in 1938. He was given a lot of medals by the Soviet government over the years, but what I like most about Stan is that he was constantly changing his methods and learning through trial and error, and he recorded all of this. For example, the whole use trauma from your past to inform your character thing was something that he did genuinely try out for a few years because it was the quickest and easiest way to teach new actors how to act. But he then realized that the ones who were using this method of emotional memory the most were also the ones who were really struggling with mental health issues the most and also had objectively worse acting, so he scrapped his idea pretty quickly. He also started out mostly with psychological work, but then realized that physicality is just as important and that many characters are better built from the outside in rather than the other way around, and so he kept things as equal parts external and internal. His ideas came from a desire for hyper-realism because he felt like directors had too much hold on the actors and that the actors felt stiff and unnatural, so he wanted to create tools for the actor to supply direction to themselves by planning, analyzing, and calculating the character beforehand. He came up with the idea of the magic if in figuring out what to do. For example, if I were a penguin, I would want to do this and I would move like this. Bam, I have an objective and a physicality for my character. Why is that character a penguin? I don't know, that's what my brain just came up with. Also, speaking of objectives, he had this idea of a character's objective and their super objective. The super objective is the one thing that the character wants through the whole play. And then the objective is the smaller thing within each scene or beat that the character wants that leads to the overall super objective. This is how you make sure that you're acting in each scene with intention. The character always wants something and is always moving towards something, and it's more engaging and real for the audience and the actor. I cannot express how many times a professor has given me a text and told me to break it up into individual beats and name the individual objectives and then the overall super objective of the piece, and it's always infuriated me because nobody, character or not, exists with one overall thing that they want, because human nature is way more complicated than that, and I've never been able to narrow down a character's desires into a one-word thing. But Now that I've read a lot of his work through an educational lens, I'm realizing that he meant this as a tool to help actors newer to acting to really study the text, to learn to really pay attention to the character on the page, and to break it down into little manageable bites that all have a consistent character throughout, so that everything feels pretty cohesive, and so that you can easily replicate that every time that you perform that scene. And I always got the vibe of, if this doesn't work for you, you're a bad actor and you can't create character or whatever. And that's usually how it's taught. But it's really just another thing in the actor's toolkit that you're welcome to throw out the window if you so desire. Even Stanislavski knew that it wasn't sacred and that we shouldn't act like it is, especially because, again, most of what he created was meant to be for new actors to get them started thinking through all these things and practicing and developing their skills to a point where all of this just becomes innate and they don't have to think these things through. And he purposefully made it very grounded in context clues and such so that it was easy for anybody to do regardless of skill level, because he was also frustrated with the education he'd gotten and thought that it was very abstract and hard to understand. So thank you for your service, Stanislavski. I'm sorry for dragging your name through the mud for the last 3 years. You were a cool guy. You did your very best, and then everybody took that and promptly destroyed it. But we have more practitioners to talk about before we can get to that point. Another Russian dead guy is Meyerhold, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his first name. I'll just put it on the screen. His work started in the 1920s-ish, and he was almost the opposite of Stanislavski, kind of. He was either part of the biomechanics movement or he created it. I can't remember. I think he created it, but either way, big fan of it. Biomechanics is anti-naturalist and anti-realist combinations of physical bodies and mechanical movement. Meyerhold always had bare sets that had like ladders, ramps, scaffolding, and mechanical equipment with harsh lighting. He believed that actors' personality should be entirely eliminated and they should just be at the will of the director. He trained them as gymnasts, as acrobats. He used as minimal text as possible, and he focused more on pantomime with an emphasis on the external action rather than the internal action. Big fan of Edward Gordon Craig, and all I can picture when talking about Meyerhold and biomechanics is, for some reason, the only image that goes into my brain is Andrew Lloyd Webber's Starlight Express, which I think is a little more complicated than Meyerhold would have liked, but the mechanical aspects really... Starlight Express is so hilarious to me. Anyway, next dead white guy is Bertolt Brecht. He was active from 1920 to 1956 in Germany. Practitioner, poet, playwright, he came up with a lot of out-of-the-box avant-garde stuff, but he was also very grounded in practicality. This was the era where everybody was writing all their manifestos, being like, we need to blow up theater as it is and completely start over because theater's a disaster. And Brecht was like, well, what if we stopped writing manifestos and we just worked on figuring out how to refunction it from the inside, because it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, and that's what he did. Because he's a really cool guy who thinks things through. I like how I'm assigning personalities to these people. I don't know anything about them. Anyway, Brecht believed that theatrical audiences were too complacent and that they liked to spectate and feel comfortably distanced from a show in front of them. And so he created the concept of epic theater, which was made to deliberately mess with this. He wanted spectators to not emotionally identify with the characters or the action at all, but rather have the actions force the audience to rationally self-reflect. And he did this by highlighting the constructed nature of performance, making stage events strange, distant, and defamiliarized to spark audience interest and focus. And he called this the Verfremdungseffekt. I spoke German once. Anyway, some examples of this include breaking the fourth wall, harsh and bright stage lighting, songs interrupting action, explanatory placards, out loud stage directions. Literally every form of avant-garde theater you've ever seen or heard of probably on some level originates from Brechtian theater. Also, Antonin Artaud's theater of cruelty, plus Brechtian theater is most everything. I'm not going to talk about Artaud because we went super in depth about him in the Tortured Artist video. He was doing similar stuff in France vaguely around the same time as Brecht. You can learn about him up here. Again, loud things driving by my window. Our next guy is Samuel Beckett. He was a playwright and a poet who was active in Ireland from 1929 to 1989. I assumed he was a practitioner when I added him to my research list. Turns out he wasn't. He just wrote a lot of things that are regularly talked about and used in theater education, so I thought I would throw him in here just for funsies. He's most known for his plays Endgame and Waiting for Godot. I know him best for his poem What is the Word, which we used for voice training when I was abroad, and it meant a lot to me, and we're gonna talk about why in a second. Hold up. But Beckett wrote his plays as bleak, impersonal, tragicomic experiences of life with black comedy and nonsense. And he focused on writing plays with a focus on human condition rather than conventional plot. He also really liked the idea of the uber marionette. And he wrote most of his work in French, which was his second language, so that he could be more precise and thoughtful with his word choices. He then translated most of his own works into English himself. But let's info dump about this poem for a second because we have time, so that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna read it for you and put it on the screen for you, and then we're gonna talk about it. Folly for two. What is the word? Folly from this, all this. Folly from all this. Folly given all this. Folly seeing all this. This. What is the word? This. this here, all this here, folly given all this, seeing, folly seeing all this here, for to, what is the word? See, glimpse, seem to glimpse, need to seem to glimpse, folly for to need to seem to glimpse. What is the word? And where? Folly for to need to seem to glimpse what, where, what is the word? There, over there, away over there, afar away over there, a faint afar away over there, what is the word? Seeing all this here, folly for to see what? Glimpse, seem to glimpse, need to seem to glimpse, a faint afar away over there, what? Folly for to need to seem to glimpse, a faint afar away over there, what is the word? What is the word? Now, when I first read this poem, I immediately clocked the atypical rhythm, how halting the words were, and how the word association was rather odd. And since I'm a linguist and a nerd who likes to analyze neurodiverse speech patterns and see how they fit within literary canon, this immediately registered as a potential example of this. And so after class, brought this poem home, and I did a bunch of research about it. And what I found is that Beckett had a stroke later in his life, and he continued writing afterwards. And he wrote this poem about trying to find words because he had some sort of aphasia or something. And while his most famous and best works were earlier in his life, before this disability happened, I don't know, this just meant a lot to me that there was a famous disabled and neurodivergent person whose name is spoken in so many conservatory spaces, and I accidentally stumbled upon him at a time that I was struggling the most in my actor training, and it felt like a little light at the end of the tunnel somehow, if that makes any sense at all. I don't know, I just want to share that tidbit. That's why Samuel Beckett makes me feel nice and warm inside. But anyway, next we have another dead white man. Sorry? No! It's a dead white woman! Shocking! Things have changed! Oh my gosh. Okay, this is a big deal. She was British. She was active from 1930 to 1975, and her name was Joan Littlewood. And she thought that theater was way too privileged in the sense of class and decided to do something about it in her theater company called the Theater Workshop. There she ran her group as an ensemble with lots of improvisation, lots of going with the flow. She believed that creation meant authenticity, inclusivity, collaboration, and everyone living, breathing, and working together. She was also known for her political shows. She was not afraid to try new and crazy things to make people angry and start a conversation in the name of the company's political agenda. Her main focus was anti-war propaganda, but she did lots of other cool stuff too. She also liked to use collective memory in shows, which is like including footage of somebody that everybody remembers or characters that everybody knows in your show to connect the show to the wider world in order to hit audiences harder, and that increased the linger effect. A lot of propaganda art. She did a lot of propaganda art, but it was cool, so I guess I'm okay with it. I read a lot of her stuff for my directing class a while back. She did not seem like a very nice person, but she did get things done, and she did change the world forever. Does that excuse her behavior? No, but it is definitely something to note. Next we have, shockingly, another woman. This is wild. Her name was Uta Hagen. She was a German-American actress, director, and educator from around 1937 to 2001. She felt like people were over-intellectualizing acting processes and that they should just sit outside and rigorously observe daily life and draw from that. She also kept her training as a solid middle ground between internal and external work, and she encouraged self-observation and reflection in her actors, always asking them how they felt before giving her critiques of something. She also published her method once, and then she changed some parts in it and republished it and was like, guys, don't read the first one. That is the one that I own. But I haven't read it, so it's all good. But anyway, yeah, she has 5 tenets and 9 questions when it comes to acting. The first tenet is substitution. An actor should pinpoint moments where their lived experience intersects with the scene to help put yourself in that moment. This is not importing your life into the play, but rather importing yourself into the circumstances. Next was transference. This is pretty much the same thing. They were separate in the first book and combined in the second, but it's finding your relationship to the character based on your own experiences and perspectives. Then specificity, that's rehearsing with the specific props that you intend to use in the final performance, and when looking at blank walls or into the audience, you visualize specific things. Authenticity, fully using costumes, props, and sets in the rehearsal room to motivate authentic action. And lastly, preparation. Hagen believed in a lot of rehearsal, like a lot of rehearsal. And then her 9 questions that she continuously asked her actors to inform their choices and understandings of their characters are: who am I? What time is it? That does include like year, time of day, etc. Where am I? What surrounds me? What are my given circumstances? What are my relationships? What do I want? What is in my way? And what do I do to get what I want? She feels like a bit of a more clarified and practical version of Stanislavski to me, if that makes any sense. I don't know if that reads to other people as well. Next we have Roy Hart. He was from South Africa, but he studied all over the place, generally places were England and France, but all over the place. He was active from the 1940s until his death in 1975, and he created revolutionary forms of performance, specifically in the realm of voice. But before we talk about what he did, we have to talk about his teacher, Alfred Wolfson. I don't know. Alfred was a voice teacher who was in the German army during the First World War, and he developed really bad shell shock, aka PTSD, to the point where he had auditory hallucinations, and he coped with that by consuming and or making music as much as humanly possible. Which, by doing so, he had to learn how to not wear out his voice, so he got a lot of practice, and he was therefore really, really good at teaching it. He created the idea of the extended technique, which is a vocal technique that's not strictly beautiful or classical sounds, but also every other kind of sound the human voice is capable of making, and proved that there are healthy ways of doing those things, that the voice is a lot more resilient than people think. He's sort of the father of music therapy, and he's another person that most people don't think much about as disabled representation, but he and his work mean a lot to me in a way that I cannot totally explain. But anyway, Roy Hart studied with Folsom from 1943 to 1962. He performed at his theater before going off to found his own theater, where he created performance specifically using extended vocal technique, which he felt reflected natural, ritual, and spiritual voice. And his work heavily inspired avant-garde theater movements. The method of teaching is a lot of exercises directly pointed towards loosening up and relaxing the singer to be able to try new things and learn what their voice is capable of, and releasing that extended voice. When I was abroad and we studied with a student of Hart's who I love and adore, that is how it was taught to us, and I, as somebody who has a hard time letting go and loosening up and trying new things, didn't understand why we were doing and what we were doing, and that in combination with the stress of the exercises pushing me too far out of my comfort zone made me completely panic and shut down. And boy, do I wish that I had known all of this history before I had studied with him, because understanding the context would have made it so much easier for me. But whatever. I know now. There are also some other musical education methods I grew up studying and just hated, and then researched for this, and I went, oh, that actually makes a whole lot of sense. I'm not including them in the video, but if you want another one of these about music education, specifically the Kodai method, Suzuki, Dalcroze's Eurythmics, or Schulwerk, let me know in the comments. I can make one. Yeah, great. Next is Meisner, Adler, Strasberg, Klerman, and the bastardization of Stanislavski, which I'm going to try not to talk too much about, because I need to save this energy for my method video in a few weeks that I'm definitely not filming today. But boy, am I riled up about it. So all four of these people started being active in the 1940s-ish, when they were all part of the Group Theater, later known as the Actors Studio in New York City, and they all had their own ideas, and a lot of infighting because of those ideas. So let's begin with Sanford Meisner. His work is based on Stanislavski, and he's known for the idea that acting is living truthfully under imaginary circumstances. He believed that actors' focus should be on other actors in the scene, and that this focus can be learned through exercises focused on repetition, improvisation, and behavioral attention. He wanted his actors to get out of their heads, to stop thinking, to get rid of their habitual behaviors, and just react and follow their impulses. He literally told his actors not to do anything until somebody else made them do it. Meisner told actors to develop the thoughts and feelings of their characters through physical action, imagination, and the given text. And it's not a mental game, it's not a backstory or character analysis, it's literally just a focus on the circumstance and on the other actors around you. He was really anti-dredge up your past trauma to make good art. He did say that whatever is necessary for an actor to enter a scene emotionally alive, whether imagined or personal, is valid, but it does need to be something that you can snap out of pretty easily after the first moment in order to focus all your attention on the actors around you, in order to organically respond to them. And I will say that when you have a scene partner who's given you absolutely nothing, the Meisner technique is not super effective at creating interesting or engaging performance. It works best with other Meisner actors, but it's still a huge part of acting education today, so I appreciate it, I'm not mad about it. Meisner's friend, Stella Adler, taught with Lee Strasberg for a bit, and everybody was friends until she went to study with Stanislavski for a while, realized Strasberg was doing Stanislavski horribly wrong, got in a big fight with him, and split off to create her own acting studio in 1949. Meisner was on her side in this fight, and we'll learn who Strasberg is in a second. He's the worst. So she focused more on the physical aspects of Stanislavski and believed that 50% of acting is external characterization, ways of walking, voice, face, etc., and 50% is imagination, emotion, action, will, etc. Much like Meisner, she wanted her actors to focus on the gold hidden in the circumstances of the given text. She also thought that extensive research was necessary in order to play a role authentically, though she also firmly believed that any backstories created should be based on imagination rather than on personal memory, and she wanted performance to be big, expressive, and carefully crafted. She was very known for regularly saying, "Don't be boring, and in your choices lies your talent." She's also cited as saying, "It will take the theater decades to recover from the damage that Lee Strasberg inflicted on American actors." So that's a great segue into our next dude, Lee Strasberg, the father of method acting. He thought that it was important that his actors directly connect the emotions of their characters to those that they had felt in the past, and do whatever it takes, no matter what, to make that possible, which is 99% of the time either dredging up old trauma or creating new trauma for no reason. He also required his students to create full character backstories for their characters to create an inner life. Do I think that's an entire waste of time because it means you're not actually focusing on the text that's given to you? Absolutely I do. Also, emotional memory, as we talked about earlier, is a thing that Stanislavski almost immediately threw out the window when he saw the effect it had on his students' well-being and on their acting skills. Strasberg actually was lucky enough to have a chance to meet Stanislavski and see some of his work, and he very much said lots of snarky things about how Strasberg could do it way better and Stanislavski had no idea what he was doing, so that's good. Also, Stanislavski openly condemned the man's practices at least twice, which is also good. He used his method to be creepy to people, particularly to Marilyn Monroe, but also many other people, and I don't like it. This, of course, made me do a quick cursory research into the psychological effects of method acting, which what I learned is that there are multiple studies directly linking it to fatigue, fear, anxiety, shame, irritability, sleep deprivation, personality changes, psychotic disorders, emotional fatigue, dissociative issues, and psychosis. When practiced correctly under professional supervision, it can be effective and safe. And like for people who are really good at compartmentalization, it's not horrible terrible, but it's pretty horrible terrible. So the fact that acting teachers around the world teach Strasberg to smush with Stanislavski and preach it as pure Stanislavski and be like, oh, every actor does this and this is super safe and this is fine, is a serious issue. And I will yell about this later in this video a little bit and a whole ton of my other video. Also, to people who go to Mount Holyoke College, I will be speaking to the theater department about this once I get all my sources in order, so don't worry. That's gonna happen. Another guy who got caught up in all of this was Harold Clurman, and he was good friends with Strasberg, but then he also left him for Stella Adler because she was a less objectively terrible human being, and also he married her, so kind of had to like her over Strasberg. Clurman was cool because he was both a director and like the theater critic and reviewer for many papers, so he shaped American theater in two different directions. And when he directed, he believed that his actors were equals in the creative process, and he let them have as much of a say in the goings-on of the play as he had, rather than direct in the sense of like, you do this and you do this and you do this. He was just an editor. He inspired, guided, and constructively critiqued the actors and designers on his project, letting their creativity lead. Uta Hagen was in at least one of his shows at one point, and she said that he imposed no line readings, no gestures, no positions on the actors. He refused to accept a mask. He demanded me in the role. He also aided actors in their character work, identifying the spine, aka the main action or arc for each character, and using that to identify the spine of the play, which then led to choosing active verbs to describe character objectives. This is also how I direct, so I have no critiques here. And while the whole friends to enemy situation was going on, Julian Beck was making history in New York City as well with his Living Theater. This is the oldest experimental theater group in the United States, and it opened in 1947. Beck was a bisexual painter and poet, heavily inspired by Artaud, and created his work specifically to challenge norms and make a statement. His troupe also traveled the world doing art in many different places, for which they often went to jail because they had a tendency to do activities on stage that typically do not involve clothing. Let's say that. He was also anti-audience complacency, and his work helped to originate off-Broadway and off-Broadway as important parts of American theater. So thank you to Beck for that. Next we have Peter Brook, British and active from 1943 to 2022. May he rest in peace. I hear this name so often I assume he had a gazillion really important life-changing things that he did, so maybe I'm missing something. But he was heavily inspired and influenced by the work of Artaud and Littlewood. He directed a lot of famous things, most notably some radical Shakespeare adaptations. And he founded the International Center for Theater Research, which is an experimental theater company. That's all I got. Then we have Jacques Lecoq. He was, again, you guessed it by his name, French. He was active from about 1956 to 1999. He grew up in the world of gymnastics, mime, and comédie de l'arte. He saw gesture as a linguistic system equal, if not more important than speech, and his training was mostly nonverbal and based around masks and physicality. You would start with a neutral mask, and then you would move on to larval masks, then expressive mask, followed by commedia masks, other half masks, etc., all leading up to the final, most difficult and smallest mask, which is the clown. He felt like masks gave his student a blank slate to work off of as a tool to escape the confines of realist acting and help them physicalize things more. Also, he never told his performers what to do, only what not to do in order to stimulate creativity, which I guess, yeah, but for many people, an environment of only criticism and not a lot of direction can be very stressful and go very badly, but I want to trust that he knew the limits of like what was effective and what was not effective. But here are my feelings on neutral mask. I've also talked about it before. He is right, it is a very effective teaching tool. But also, the personality of the neutral mask is usually described as simple, animalistic, curious, childlike, etc. And the physicality and way of interacting with the world is effectively the non-speaking toddler version of me that I, as an autistic person, have been abused out of. So watching other people try on my trauma and talk about how much it taught them feels terrible and wildly unsafe to me in the classroom. So I did it once for like 3 minutes, had a panic attack, and never did it again. And I think that now that I'm able to put all this into words and that I'm more comfortable in my body and physicality, I would like to try it again by myself, maybe. But I did really struggle with this when it did happen. We also learned some of his 20 movements that each taught a different type of physical focus, like One was about weight in the body, another was about sweeping motions. And I really enjoyed these, and I think that they're super effective. Now that I know about Laban, I think they're basically him taking all the Laban things and turning them into specific motions for you to learn to study. Also, if you are a theater nerd and want a nerdy fun fact, Julie Taymor, the person who directed Broadway's The Lion King, you know, the one with tons of masks and very stylized movement, she studied with Lecoq, which it just makes so much sense. Oh my gosh, I love it. Anyway, moving on. We're almost done, by the way. Next we have Augusto Boal. He was active from 1950 to 2009 in Brazil, and just an all-around really cool dude. Shout out to him. He took the ideas of applied theater and pedagogy of the oppressed to create theater of the oppressed. He tried to transform the audience into active participants in the performance. He used his art to start conversations and to make change, and also he held office in the Brazilian government for a while, which is really cool. He used these tactics to inform his legislation. He had I think it was called legislative theater, something like that. So just lots of really cool stuff. He believed that only the oppressed are able to free the oppressed, and that rebellion and the impetus for change can only come from within an oppressed group. And that traditional theater audience social norms were in their own way oppressive because the spectators did not get the chance to also take place in the socially liberating actions that the actors were doing. His solution was to make the spectators into actors. He created what's known as the forum theater method, where the actors set up a scene or a problem or a situation, and then an audience member replaces the actor to try and determine the solution. He also let his actors do a lot of performance art in situations where the fact that it was performance or art is pretty unclear, just to start conversations around various issues. He's also well known for his theater, The Oppressed work with prisoners, and he was also exiled for a bit. So that's really cool. He very much changed the landscape of theater, drama therapy, and activism as we see it today. And a lot of what he did is kind of informing my work, so I have a special appreciation for him. All right, last three, almost done. Steven Berkoff, he's still active, he's still alive, but he started being active in the world of theater in 1958, and he's known for in-your-face theater. This is a form of confrontational performance that combines physical theater, total theater, and expressionism, aka it wanted you to react very viscerally to the performance. And he did that by filling his works with filthy language, taboo topics, nudity, sex, violence, humiliation, unpleasant emotions, and everything in between. Not my cup of tea, but good for him. Next is my man Grotowski. He was active from 1958 to 1999 in Poland. For people who have studied acting at Mount Holyoke College, this is the plastiques dude. He created the idea of poor theater, which is focused almost exclusively on the skill of the actor. Sets and costumes were minimal, and everything was based on movement and acting. Built kind of off of Peter Brook and Roy Hart. He once said text becomes theater only through the actor's use of it, which I quite like. And I also liked how he said, if you want to create a true masterpiece, you must always avoid beautiful lies. We are not there to please or pander to the spectator. We are here to tell the truth. And he had this rehearsal method, which is called plastiques or corporeals, which was about building the flow of motion through improvised movement. The point is to just turn impulse into action. Don't think, just move, but also always do it either against an animate partner or an inanimate partner to help find those impulses and flow in the movement. Wish I knew about the partner thing and the impulse thing when I was told to do this as a warm-up in every single class and felt so anxious by the concept of just move, don't think, that I froze up and got yelled at for doing so. But anyway, last but not least, we have the viewpoints method. This method was created in the 1970s, and it is a technique for dance composition. There were initially 6 viewpoints, and students would focus on one isolated viewpoint at a time and then learn to combine them. Later on, Anne Bogart and Tina Landau added in 3 more viewpoints to make it more practical and holistic in creating staging. The whole thing feels a little bit more straightforward version of Laban again. But the initial 6 were space, the architecture and physical space, topography and distance the movement takes place in, shape, the shape of the individual body and the shape of the collective bodies, and curves, lines, angles, arches, stationary versus in motion, etc. Time, the tempo, duration, kinesthetic response, and repetition of movement. Emotion, the physical or narrative content ascribed to movement, and the movement itself, jerky versus smooth, flowing versus slow or fast, etc. And story, the perceptual ability to see and understand logic systems as an arrangement of collected information. And then the added ones are pitch, volume, and timbre. Timbre being the texture of the sound, if you don't know what that means. Great, that's all I got. My tummy just rumbled. Oh man. All right, so now that we've learned about the 26 names that every single professor in the history of ever throws around, what does this tell us about acting education as a whole? The first thing that I picked up almost immediately is that most of these methods we're using entirely unchanged in our classrooms today have not been changed since the 1940s. You know, when the only psychology we really had was whatever the heck came out of Freud's mouth. And also the fact that if you go a little deeper, most of these practitioners really look towards Freud to inform their work. The second thing is that these are pretty much entirely white people and pretty much entirely men. And this is an issue not just from like a we need to diversify and decolonize our syllabus aspect, but also from the knowledge about how minority status impacts psychology. The majority of these pedagogies have the goal of getting the actor to step out of their comfort zone and loosen up and try new things so that they can have all the physicalities, all the voices, all the experiences in their back pockets, and then intentionally choose which ones they want to use when they perform an act. But things that are fun little stretch out of comfort zone for a cishet white man are in a lot of cases very, very traumatizing for everybody else. For example, Artaud liked to have his actors train in the nude. For male actors, this was uncomfortable but freeing on some level, and they learned a lot from it and they were able to figure it out. For many non-male actors, this made them feel like they were in genuine danger just based on how the world views and treats the non-male body. And as we all well know at this point, being hyper anxious in a space for learning removes your ability to learn in said space because your brain is too busy panicking to think about expanding and growing and inputting new information. This is something that has, as of late, been taken into account in regards to education reform. It is why the field is trying to input more diverse role models and identities, and why trauma-informed practices are so important. And as we talked about in my video on the flaws of our grading system, the idea of specialized schools for young people is very recent. Like, widespread education is only about 200 years old, which seems like a long time, but to put that in perspective, right, the neurodivergent movement is only about 30 years old. And we realize that children actually develop mentally rather than just being tiny adults only about 100 years ago, well after many of these techniques were being widely taught. And our understanding of psychology and mental health and safety in regards to educating people are very, very recent. At this point in school and education history, most of the teaching methods used 100 years ago have been thrown out the window and we are doing completely new things and more effective and safer things. But then with actors training, we aren't. We are doing the exact same thing. And since it has been so long since the original practitioners, it's usually a sort of game of telephone, with that pedagogy slightly and unintentionally warping every new person it goes to just based on how people interpret and use pedagogy. I've seen this in my own acting training. In Italy, I had the privilege of studying with professors who were direct students of Roy Hart and Lecoq, and in researching the techniques afterwards, I see how they slightly changed for that person's interpretation, but roughly stayed pretty close to how I read the original work. But I've also been in other acting situations where I've learned a concept from a professor who studied with another professor who studied with Stella Adler, who studied with Stanislavski. And we saw how even one generation, Stanislavski to Strasberg, messed everything up for everybody. What I'm trying to say with this little ramble here is that this pedagogy is old and it's outdated, and a lot of it comes from the same time period where we thought students could only learn if you hit them. We thought that if women walked upstairs, their uteruses would tip and they wouldn't be able to have children anymore. And we believed that everybody was attracted to their parents. So like, even when taught correctly and at face value, just as the original practitioners intended, it's not based on what we know about psychology and trauma and learning because it's outdated, and the fact that it hasn't really been reformed yet is wildly concerning to me as a teacher and as a student. We also know that acting is still most commonly taught by white men, who are statistically way less likely to understand the nuances of trauma and minority status in classrooms and in relation to acting training. And the thing about actors education is that it's actually one of the most dangerous fields of teaching, and people don't realize that because they think, oh, it's just playing around. It's easier than, say, math or biology, so they discredit it as valuable or important to pay attention to. But it takes just as much work as any other field. It's just a different kind of work. It's usually internal work and it's less visible work. And it's learning to train your brain and your body to do things that it does not normally do, learning how to teach your mind to recognize what is real and what is pretend, and learn to compartmentalize that so you can do it 8 times a week without completely destroying yourself. It is a very delicate process and it can go in all kinds of unsafe directions really quickly, which is why child actors are usually disasters, but that's a discussion for another day. The point here is, when we look at the field of education and we start to reform it for the safety of our students, most of the time we're thinking about your lecture halls and your math classrooms and your biology labs, and you're thinking, oh, arts education doesn't really apply because it's different. And we just leave it as it is, assuming that at some point, whatever, it'll get figured out. And what that is inevitably doing is emboldening people to think that these techniques are set in stone, that there's nowhere to go from here, and that since this is how it's always been done, and it's staying unchanged while every other form of education is actively changing, it's sacred and needs to stay as it is. And that is causing serious harm to students, especially as our acting schools become more and more diverse. I cannot express how many acting workshops I've been in where the cis white male students were seemingly having a blast, and then everybody who was disabled, BIPOC, minority gendered, whatever, was so much more hesitant and struggled more with feeling safe, and the cis white male students were like, just get over it, relax, try harder, you're fine, without understanding the privilege that they held in that space and the privilege that they hold to feel safe anywhere and doing anything, and how making use of that privilege can often make other people feel more unsafe. So going forward, I think that it's time that we look at the newer, less name brand techniques, particularly those written by, I don't know, not cishet white men, start to integrate our curriculums the way that we've integrated the rest of our classrooms, start to integrate our educators just as much, and realize that the reason that we don't have enough representation in media has so much to do with the fact that we don't make it through acting school. and actually, I don't know, do something about that, because this field is widely unchanged and widely unregulated. And as an actor, teacher, and psychologist, I am very, very concerned about what we are doing to students who study the arts. If you want to learn more about accessible arts education, you can check out the playlist linked in the description below. I have a video on the harms of method acting coming out soonish, as well as one about vocal training as a disabled person, so you're welcome to subscribe if you want to see those right when they come out. And as always, thank you for watching this marathon of video. Thank you for listening, thank you for learning. Remember, it's never too late to start over. I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.